Everybody, look who we have here. We have Florida criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, Jeremy Mutz. And who is your little co-host?
Hi, little co-host, co-counsel is Levi Winston, and a little strange for me to appear with him on the podcast, but we just had like a little scheduling snafu. Maybe I didn't tell my wife the right times. Sometimes I do make mistakes like that. So he'll just be with us for a few minutes.
Okay, yeah, he seems pretty well behaved for now, but how old is he?
He's a lot better behaved than his dad. He is 8 months old and probably a lot smarter and more handsome than I am too. But people do say he looks like me. I don't know about that. I think he's way more handsome.
Oh, well, congratulations. This is
Thank
like
you.
a first for someone to show up with their child, much less a baby. So, okay, well, let's dive in first. Do you want to give us a quick bio and tell us how you feel about whether Wendi is going to be arrested?
I feel good about it. I feel in the sense that, and of course, this is what, we've all wanted to see, complete justice for what happened to Dan Markel, his murder, and, what his family's endured. And I think we're pretty close. I still kind of have a feeling they might do something before Christmas or around that time, before the end of this year is out. But that's just kind of an inkling of what I feel the evidence shows, what we've seen in the last couple trials. And it seems like they have a lot more evidence than what we thought, 2 or 3 years ago. So I think it's moving in the right direction. I think they will charge her. I think in some ways, I've watched a lot of your content recently. You were talking through a lot of Wendy's interview and things with Loophole Lawyer, and I really enjoyed that episode. And it seems like she has kind of talked herself into being charged just with her demeanor at trial. Oh, they'll never charge me, ha ha ha, and it's almost like she's begged for it. And I think the state really has it. My legal career began in the state attorney's office, in which all of this is being decided and been litigated. Georgia Kappelman was probably a semester or two ahead of me in law school and beginning her career with the state attorney's office. So she was just moving from misdemeanors to felonies about the time I was an intern. And then she was in felony when I was hired full time. So I began there. I went to Florida State Law School. I was there before Dan Markel was a professor, maybe by 2 or 3 years. And then I went with the state attorney's office and worked there 12 and a half years, did civil family law afterwards in Daytona, Central Florida. And then in the Panhandle, I moved back to the West and, did civil, family, and I do criminal defense now. So apologize for that. He is, I think, wanting to control the computer, which I, can't always let him have the reins, so to speak. He loves the remote controls and any kind of screens, which I don't know what we're going to do when he gets older.
Oh, okay. Well, if you need to stand up and move around, as long as you can keep talking to us, then I think we're okay with that. Thank you so much. I mean, you could have just canceled altogether, so we're grateful for your time. So total, how many years did you spend in Leon County working for the state attorney?
I spent 12 years, 7 months, and 10 days with the state attorney's office. So, of course, in the beginning, I was in misdemeanor court. I was trying the DUIs and things like that you cut your teeth on. And then later I was in felony court for about 6 years. And Georgia Kappelman was my boss on a couple of occasions. So that was interesting, So I've seen a lot of the people maybe in a different light than what you see in the trial. And of course, her role there as a boss, is a little different, day-to-day mundane things. And she could be very funny. And, I thought was a great boss, very, very supportive boss, wanted to see her attorneys grow. And develop their trial skills, and you really couldn't ask for more support in a prosecutor as a boss, as a prosecutor.
Hmm. Well, isn't she just a little bit older than you? I think she,
Just a little bit, maybe
yeah.
a year or two.
Oh,
Well,
okay. Oh,
I'm
great.
gonna hand off
Okay, thank
to my
you.
buddy.
Thank you.
He's been a good co-host, but I think he's getting a little
Thank
impatient.
you. It was nice to see him, though. Very cute. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. He's my little buddy, and I hope he does not go into the practice of law. I mean, maybe he'll decide to do that, and I'll be proud of him no matter what. But it's not something I would encourage him to do. I think, and you've had a lot of good content about what it's like to, get into law school and practice,
Yeah.
and it's, there's a lot that I love about it, but there's a lot that is just, they kind of, some clients just beat you down. They don't pay you, things like that. I
Yeah,
don't.
it can be very stressful. But that's one good thing about working for the state is that you don't have to stress out for clients paying you at least. So, I mean, was it
That's true.
overall a good learning experience?
It was a great learning experience, and I still think it's one of the best jobs you can have.
Hmm.
Um, if you have a heart to help people that are victims of crime, and you care about your community, I think it's one of the best jobs you could have. But it's a grueling job. I mean, if as a prosecutor, if you care about what you're doing, there are sleepless nights. There are nights you wake up thinking about your cases. I think every prosecutor has probably made some decisions they wish they'd done differently. Sometimes that can take the form of something truly tragic. I mean, you give somebody a break in a domestic violence situation, and a victim is, killed later on, and you certainly think about that. You blame yourself for that, um, even though it's the bad guy doing something. It's a tough job, but it's a wonderful job, and I think I was just reading a novel recently by Janine Perot. Talked about her, I mean, loosely based, I think, on her experience in the 70s as the first female prosecutor in Westchester County, and the first domestic violence attorney, a prosecuting attorney. At the time, in New York, it was not a crime for a man to beat his wife, and so she was involved in changing that law, and just had a heart for victims. And it kind of reminded me of a little bit of, some of my career, because I was in the domestic violence unit a couple times as a felony
Hmm.
prosecutor. So and it's a great learning experience. I mean, if you're a new lawyer, you're just coming out of law school, there's probably no better way to get experience in the courtroom than be a public defender or an assistant state attorney or a district attorney somewhere for a couple years, 3 years. I probably stayed too long. If I was, looking back on it, I probably should have, tried to get on a career path to do felony sooner than what I did, and then leave and do something else within a 5 or 6 year span. I think staying 10 or 12 years, I think I pressed my luck at the end of that.
Mm. What do you mean pressing your luck? I mean, weren't you proud to be rising up in the ranks, and were you thinking of possibly becoming a state attorney?
I was proud of my job, and pretty much by the seventh year, I rose about as high as I thought I would go. I was in the felony trial division, and then towards the end of my time there, I had kind of my dream job at the office. I was the head of county court, so I was leading the younger prosecutors that were doing misdemeanors and DUIs, the things that I started with, and the interns that came to us from law school, mostly FSU, but some from other law schools that would intern with us. That was my dream job, because you could train them, and all the things that I learned the hard way, I could kind of impart those lessons into the newer prosecutors. And I felt like that was such a rewarding thing, is to work with those attorneys. Their newness, their enthusiasm rubbed off on me and kept me fresh, but also to give back and to see them grow. And I think almost everybody that worked for me during that time went on to be a successful prosecutor in their own right or do other successful things. So I'm very proud of that. I never wanted to run for office though. So I never wanted to run and be Willie Meggs or Jack Campbell or do any of that. When I say my luck ran out, I was very lucky as a prosecutor because most of the time for 10 or 12 years, nobody ever stood over my shoulder and told me I had to do this or that. And generally speaking, let me do what I felt was right. And so I was lucky, really lucky there, because it can be very political as a prosecutor. You're working for an elected politician. And, and particularly, sometimes in small towns, but sometimes in big cities, politics can get involved. I mean, we saw a little bit of this in the Markell case. We've talked about that before. A big city, bigger than Tallahassee, Philadelphia, where, Ellen Greenberg was murdered in 2011, and the politics have seemed to have derailed that. And so I was lucky. I never had somebody come and tell me you need to drop this or do this or that until I was toward the end, about 12 years on, and I was told to drop a DUI case that I hadn't even seen the video of it. And I was just told to drop it. And so I kind of got at odds with Willie Meggs from that point on. And of course we had an unsolved murder from 1966 that at one point he wanted to go forward with investigating it and then didn't. And I was kind of on the wrong side of that at the end. When the music stopped, I was left without a chair. So that's why I say that, I probably would have been healthier and happier if I had, moved on to something else before that, but I might have missed out on being the chief of the leader of the county court division, which was really the dream job as far as I was concerned there. And I would have probably been happy just continuing to do that, or in the felony. Georgia wanted me to go back to the trial division and try felonies, and and some attorneys just, they make a career of that, and it can be a wonderful thing. And I probably thought that's what I would do. But looking back on it now, I don't know that I'd want that life of just every other week you've got trials and stuff. It's a tough way to live.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to how Jack Campbell said after Donna's trial that Georgia and Sarah needed to rest. So some people were kind of angry, like, come on, go ahead and arrest Wendi.
Yeah.
And then some people were saying that perhaps they were waiting to see if Dugan was going to become a judge. So do you think that had any sort of bearing on some sort of delay?
I heard that too. I don't know if it would or not. I think it certainly would have been something they'd think about if she had went on the bench, and then they'd have to bring in another new lawyer or one or two as co-counsel. They'd have to get up to speed. That might have been something they thought about, but I don't have any direct knowledge of that. I kind of feel like, if she had gone on the bench, somebody else could have stepped in, and, by the time something like that would go to trial, the new attorney would be up to speed. It would be 4, 5, 6 months at minimum. So, and they've changed co-counsel before. In the beginning, Anna Norris was working with Georgia, and I think it was the first trial, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So I think they're prepared for that. I don't know I kind of thought it would be more something if they'd wait till after Donna was sentenced, and so I kind of felt like it would certainly be after October when she was sentenced. And something in my mind kind of thinks around the end of December would be a time that I would be expecting. But again, it's just kind of my feeling about it. I don't have any inside information on that.
Yeah. And if you did, you probably couldn't say anything to the public about it. Yeah. Well, what about this whole grand jury process? Can you tell us how it works? And is that only for, say, like felony cases?
That's one of the most interesting parts of the courtroom. I feel like the grand jury, and technically in Florida, you could take a misdemeanor to a grand jury as well. Um, and it's not a bad thing to do, because if you have a tough case, like let's say, in people that live in college towns, they understand what I'm referring to. You might have an college athlete that's arrested for a crime. You could take it to a grand jury, and then if they come back and they don't indict the person, as an elected politician, a state attorney, you could say, well, I took it to a grand jury and they declined to charge. Or the converse is true. You might want that additional, stamp of, imprimatur of somebody looking at this. Let's say a football player is charged with abuse of his girlfriend. You could take it to a grand jury and they put their stamp on it. It's not just one prosecutor going after this person, but it definitely applies in a capital case. So a first degree murder, they take it to a grand jury, and the proceedings are closed. They're secret. It's interesting because it's a crime to release the evidence from a grand jury without, a court unsealing it. So, and I think it's a wonderful part of our process, because witnesses have that protection. They're encouraged to come forward and tell what they know, what they saw, to a grand jury. And we trust that the grand jurors that sit and hear a number of cases, it may not just be one case. They may sit for, a whole quarter or a whole period of time where they hear multiple things. And so I think it's a wonderful part of our system. And of course, they can come back with an indictment, a true bill, or they can come back and decide not to indict, and it's a no true bill. In Florida, other states may be variations on that, but in Florida, that's how it works. And it's not hard for a prosecutor to indict someone. Prosecutor totally controls the evidence that a grand jury hears and sees. And so you hear the old saying, some of the audience probably knows, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich.
Yeah.
So I can come in with a completely one-sided presentation and say this ham sandwich murdered 3 people. And, if they hear that, they indict the ham sandwich. Conversely, I've seen cases, and there's one that was quite controversial in Tallahassee involving David Mays, who was Chief Osceola of FSU in the 80s. He was the one that would ride the horse and plant the spear on the football field. And some people say that the grand jury was only presented with evidence that supported it being an accidental death, and they really didn't get to see evidence that would have shown it was a homicide. So the prosecutor has total control over what they see.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was muting myself. So, with this grand jury process, how often does it meet in Leon County? Is it once a month or twice a month or something?
That I don't know. I think it may not be that frequent. That I don't know. Of course, in the federal system, they also have a grand jury that would meet, and some could be many months that the people serve on that.
And is it pretty much like a mini trial where it takes place in a courtroom?
Oh, it does. It occurs in a courtroom, and it is all the formalities of a trial. Witnesses will take the witness stand and provide their testimony, give evidence, and exhibits are presented to the grand jury just like they would be at trial. There'd be court reporters, but it's just closed. It's not something that you could, as a member of the public, say, I want to sit in on that and see it. And, it's kind of like a built-in gag order for what happens there versus another trial. I mean, you were there present in the courtroom for the Markell trials, and as a member of the media, or as an attorney, or a member of the public, and you can talk about everything you saw. and you see everything the jurors see for the most part. You know, there may be some crime scene photos or autopsy photos that the public doesn't see, depending on how they're oriented in the courtroom. But in a grand jury, all that's closed, and you have to get a court order to release it. And you know, a lot of good reasons for that. You know, if you think about somebody's innocence, like if they say I committed murder, they present something to a grand jury. If all that just is aired publicly, I mean, I'm kind of tarnished as a murderer, no matter what. So some things will go to a grand jury. The public may not really know about it.
Okay. So this sounds incredibly time consuming and expensive then. So if they did have some sort of grand jury proceeding for Wendi, do you think they would bring all the same witnesses that they would probably use for a trial? Or do you think they would pare it down to cut costs?
They would definitely pare it down.
Yeah.
Because your burden there is probable cause. And so you don't have to have quite as much that you'd have at trial. It's more like a civil case. Probable cause is like, did a person probably committed the crime, and that's the evidence that you'd have to arrest or to charge. And so it's a lower burden, and that's why they say a DA can indict a ham sandwich. It's not it's not the loftiest burden, and that's where you hope the prosecutors are judicious, though, and bring a good case, because you don't want to be in a situation that, yes, that a grand jury has indicted this person, but now can we actually prove it at trial? And so that's something that a good prosecutor is going to be focused on all the way from the beginning.
Yeah. And in general, how does the state attorney's office determine what case they're going to move forward with? Like, who's in charge?
Yeah, that's a good decision too. And this probably varies from place to place, but typically in Tallahassee, you'd have a meeting, all the division chiefs in the office, the leaders of the felony trial divisions, and maybe the leader of the misdemeanor county court division might sit in on that as well. But if it's a closer case, they would discuss it, hear what they have, hear what the challenges are, and, maybe decide as a group whether to go forward or not. Some instances, it may not be necessarily put to a vote, but just kind of you get a consensus. Yeah, we have it, or no, we need this, this, and this to actually prove this case at a trial. And so it could be a consensus like that. Other cases are much more routine. They may just be something that law enforcement comes to a division chief, certainly somebody at a higher level at the office, and says, here's what we got. Do we have it? And then they approve a warrant, and the arrest is made. And it may not be something that, all the leaders of the office get together on. Others, the state attorney, the elected prosecutor is involved from the beginning. Maybe even the night of the murder, they get the call. There'd be a prosecutor on call, like Georgia, probably somebody of her level, a felony trial division. There's a homicide. They get a call. They may go to the scene. They're probably going to call their boss, Willie Meggs or Jack Campbell, so they're in the loop. And so it's done that way. Where it goes wrong, where it goes right, I mean, all those things come together, and you may have the top boss make the final call, say, yeah, we've got it, or no. Of course, in the Markell case, we saw it play out in the media that Willie Meggs didn't think there was enough in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then there was another case before that I think it kind of illustrates the question. A woman named Barbara Hart passed away in a bathtub, and local police department thought it was a homicide. And, long story short, they bring the charges to, at that time, Willie Meggs' number two person, the deputy state attorney, was Robin Lotane, very seasoned prosecutor, very well regarded. And she decided to charge the husband of Miss Hart with homicide. Ultimately it played out where Willie Meggs didn't think it was a homicide, didn't think it was provable. He made the decision to drop that case. So that there's an example of how the elected prosecutor, the elected politician, can make the final call. And I think it was a very heart wrenching thing that the case was dropped from Miss Lotane's point of view. Her husband, Bob Lotane, published an article about that several years ago that talked about it. But, there's a decision where he said no, and he's the elected state attorney. He can make that call.
Okay. So it could be one person with the sole power, which
That's right.
may or may not coincide with public sentiment.
It may not. And, you hope that person has got a moral compass and is just going where the evidence goes and coincides with the evidence and then makes a good faith decision. I don't feel like I can prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm not going to go forward with it. And you hope that person has that. But I think we all know that there are examples throughout certainly recent history where the public looks at a case and it's like, how in the world could they not go forward with this? Ellen Greenberg, which I referred to earlier, she was found with something like 27 stab wounds in the back of her head. And her neck. Mm-hmm. And one of them, the ME rule was post-mortem. So, I'm not an MD, but that doesn't sound like a suicide to me, and I think a lot of people feel that way and feel like the 2 or 3 different elected prosecutors have looked at that and have been responsible for it. They've all declined to prosecute. And I think a lot of people feel like, well, that's an example of the responsible people not going where the evidence really is leading them to go.
Yeah, such a horrible case. And did you follow Adelson Galvani's mom's case? She's been on this channel a few times.
I have. I watched, I believe it was on your channel where she went in depth and discussed this going all the way back to when she was a child and it first happened. I believe that was your content. And then I saw recently you were discussing it with somebody else that an arrest was made. So I think that was, awesome. And I think, you can't discount the role you played in that, because I think podcasts and media, covering it helps, sometimes a right decision to be made. And certainly her efforts to advocate for her mom, made a difference. So that's an awesome thing. That's what we live for and hope for with these cases.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, that case happened back in August 1982. So during all these years, different DAs kind of looked at it and thought, nah, we're not going to prosecute, which is crazy, but I think that's how things were back in the 1980s, for example. So it's incredible after so many years that there are still witnesses alive. And, it still seems like there's a good case to be brought because they arrested him.
It does seem good. And, I have to take my hat off to that local district attorney and the law enforcement, because it can be intimidating to look at a case file that's in some cases older than some of the investigators that are working it. And in some cases, maybe older than the prosecutor that will try that case in court. So that's intimidating. And sometimes you think of a cold case it's a worse case than a new one. And there is some of that, evidence can be degraded. Witnesses, their memories don't get better with age. But, sometimes cold cases can be stronger years down the road, because some people may not be willing to talk back when it happened, and now they're willing to talk. They got divorced. They're no longer married to this joker. They don't feel like they have to lie for him anymore. So now they can tell the truth. So, I think it takes an open-minded, courageous investigator and prosecutor to look at it that way and say, I've got this. And, there are actually some things here that those folks didn't have back in 1981, 1982. and let's do it. Let's get justice for this person. And, so I take my hat off to him, and what an incredible story. I mean, it was heartbreaking to watch the daughter and hear her story. Cause what a horrible thing that, don't want to say looking for the right word here, but to go through that and losing your mom and then coming to believe your dad did it. That's a hard thing.
Yeah. Yeah, she's very strong and she's very successful in her career as well as her personal life. So, yeah, so it's great to see on YouTube that people can make a difference. So, and speaking of that, what do you think about my sending flowers and gifts to Georgia as well as Sarah and Catherine? I mean, is that improper or is it okay?
I don't think it's improper. I mean, I think they do have some ethics rules and
Rules.
thresholds for things they can accept, but I think if it falls below that, I don't remember what the dollar amount is, but I think a lot of people feel like we should honor them and what they've done in this case, and they had a tough job and they did so well with it. I think a lot of people feel like, it'd be nice to honor them and to, do something to show we appreciate it. I know they don't expect anything, but it's nice to hear that. I recently ran in the courthouse. I don't know if you remember the case in Orlando where the young lady had her boyfriend in the suitcase and was charged.
Oh, yeah, Sarah Boone. Yes.
Sarah Boone, her attorney answered her ad. She went through several attorneys, and then the gentleman from Milton, with former public defender there, answered it and came and represented her, and really probably with no expectation of getting paid for that. So, think about taking off 2 weeks, 3 weeks out of your practice to do that. And I ran into him just by chance in the courthouse in Bay County. I said, a lot of us watched that trial and just felt like you did a great job with what you had to work with. And, I don't know that too many people had told him that, but I just felt like it was important to say that to him, that, I felt like he jumped into something really tough and did a good job. And, same thing with Georgia and Sarah Catherine. I feel like, I can't praise them enough for what they've done in the case. They probably neither one want praise and neither one want, anything for it, but, they did a great job.
Mm-hmm. Well, did people give you gifts when you were working there?
No. And I think other than maybe somebody giving me a plant or something like that, and just things like that. And sometimes people would try to do something. I'd say, no, I just can't accept anything. Sometimes people would want to say, oh, I'll give you a gift card or something like that. No, we can't accept anything. But, people just want to do something nice sometimes. But, I would just tell people, hey, it's my job and it's, my pleasure to do this job. And if we can get a good result, that's all the thanks I need. Really, if the jury comes back favorably on a case like that, that's really the reward I was looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you ever volunteer to represent someone in a trial for free? I mean, that's pretty crazy. I had no idea her attorney was doing it for free.
I think they worked out a fee agreement, but just the fact that she's going to prison for life and, was, looking that way strongly even before the trial, it's sort of a de facto, we're doing it pro bono. I guess under the right circumstances, I might, there are things I might have done differently earlier in my practice that were more risky that I wouldn't do now. Having a family now, it's kind of like, if I'm going to give 2 or 3 weeks in a trial of that kind, I can't do that to my family, and whereas, starting out in my practice, you kind of do some things, you take cases that, well, I might not get paid for this, but if I if I don't get paid, I can kind of, I can eat that for now. But you kind of get to a point in your career, it's like you've got a family, and it's
Bills, bills to
that's a
pay.
harder pill
Yeah.
to swallow. When I first started my family law practice in Daytona, I was trying to get experience and trying to get clients, and quite a few didn't pay, and it's just something that um, part of the learning experience that I think if I was doing it all differently now, I would have done things differently, and maybe not accepted some of those cases.
Yeah, same here. I definitely learned lessons from the start, just tripping up and not billing enough.
Oh yeah,
So you learn each
we
one is a lesson. Yeah.
we all do. They don't really teach you how to run a business in law school, and running a practice as a business, and they teach you evidence, they teach you maybe mock trial, and teach you how to present yourself in court probably, and how to write, how to think, but they don't teach you how to run a business, and you know uh, keep up with things like that. And there are a lot of people out there that feel like they don't have to pay their lawyer if they you know get a it's different from other professions. I mean, I think somebody repairs your car, you know number one, they can keep your car on the lot if you don't pay, but
Yeah.
um, but people wouldn't think of, to the extent that they would with a lawyer. We resolve a divorce case. Oh, I'll pay you. And then you never hear them again.
Yeah. That's so true. I had to sue a client last year and I finally got paid because I wasn't even sure if she would still pay, even if she lost the case. So,
Yeah.
but boy, it was like pulling teeth, jumping through hoops, trying to get to that judgment and finally get
Yeah.
some payment. Yeah, it's frustrating. So, but I do have some questions for you regarding the Adelson case. So, for example, did you know about the allegation that perhaps Jackie Fulford or one of Donna's attorneys had helped her make some sort of phone call with an Apple Watch to Harvey or to someone else? There was some sort of rumor or an allegation out there.
I did hear that. I heard that as well. But I don't know beyond that in terms of whether that was substantiated or not. But I did hear that come up. And, that, and I actually, on a couple different scenarios of that where it came out that maybe an attorney helped her make a call. So, I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it was Tim Jansen, perhaps, or maybe Katie Bogenschutz said that that was actually a crime punishable by up to a year imprisonment. Does that sound right?
I'm not too familiar with the statute, but it sounds right. And,
So is that something that you think the state attorney would actually prosecute an attorney for if it were true?
that would be tough. Florida has pretty tough laws on some communication related things. It's rare. I mean, it's rare to charge anybody on that. I've never seen it. Um, there's also charges in Florida that if you record somebody audio without them knowing, that's a felony. And, that can turn political very fast. I've seen some cases where people were charged with that statute, and it was just messy prosecutions because it's built into that, because it's so rare. You have a defense of selective prosecution. To one example I remember, I think it was a state agency and somebody was being terminated, and they recorded it in the meeting just to kind of protect themselves. They thought they were going to be fired, and probably fired wrongfully, and they were. But then they turned around, they're going to be charged with a felony. And then, so your automatic defense is, well, nobody else is ever charged with this. And it's true. So if they did that, they really have to have an airtight case, and it would really have to be something substantive that made a difference. Like if the attorney was helping her call a witness to get them to change their testimony or something like that. It would have to be something significant, not just, I'm going to help you make a three-way call to, line up, somebody to come clean the house or something like that. I think people would be turned off by that. But I don't know. I don't know what the substance of it was, but people are all the time trying to do shady stuff with the jail calling system. I mean, I used to, as a prosecutor, we would listen to the jail calls, to determine if there's evidence, something of value on there. And all the time people would be trying to get three-way calls and trying to bypass the computer that would keep track of who you're calling. They'd use other people's PIN numbers to make calls. And the worrisome part of it, though, is when they're trying to call a victim to get them to manipulate the story and their testimony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of that, how did you feel about those Jailhouse daughters who testified, Patricia Bird and Trina Bernhardt?
That's why true crime is so compelling, because you just can't make up this stuff. And you could sit there almost as a fiction writer, Grisham or Connolly, trying to think, could they come up with some of this stuff? And I mean, it's very interesting to hear them and to get an insight into that. And it's just, very, very wild, very interesting to have somebody on trial that potentially is trying to get other witnesses to come and lie, and she's writing scripts, and then the back and forth. Well, if I was a juror, would I believe them? And some of them got horrible records and horrible incentives to color their testimony one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And so you're kind of sitting at the edge of your seat. How would a jury look at this? Are they going to believe this person? And then we kind of had the benefit of some of the jurors coming back and telling us what they felt was compelling evidence. And I don't think they really put a lot of faith in what they said. I don't think they based a huge part of their verdict on those two ladies, but very interesting. It's something you don't see every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another off the wall question, I don't know if you can answer this, but on the subject of the 723,000 or 732,000 restitution that Donna Adelson is supposed to pay, how aggressive would the state be in trying to get that money?
Typically, they're not aggressive on something like that. It's a judgment, like any other civil judgment against the person. This particular case, though, I mean, this case has kind of pushed the rule book out the window a little bit on a number of levels, on a number of issues. So, I mean, it might be something that they go after. It's my understanding that those judgments would expire, I think, in Florida after 10 years, maybe. And so would the state attorney's office help them, renew that judgment? Things like that, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I could the Markells hire an attorney to try to enforce that and seize assets? I mean, that's a question that I don't know the answer to. Would it be worth it? I noticed that there's, I guess, a property or something that the Adelsons own that's
they have stuff in trust pretty much. Yeah. So that's an issue.
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know. It's certainly, one prominent example of that is the O.J. Simpson case. I don't think he ever paid much of the judgment that he had, in the wrongful death verdict against him. I think the Goldmans, tried to enforce some of that, but he would hide assets. He would, do some of the things that I would expect the Adelsons probably to do as well.
Yeah, except in Donna's case, it's restitution to the state as opposed to just a judgment for someone. So I would hope that they would be a little bit more aggressive to digging and trying to find assets and maybe hopefully getting at money that has been put into trust. because they did cause the state to expend lots of taxpayer money to do all these, to do the case
They
twice.
could. I mean, they could, and a lot of that would be investigative costs and stuff that they
Yeah.
are entitled to. But I've never seen the state attorney's office really go after that aggressively. But I've also never seen a number that large. Normally
Hmm.
investigative costs are not even a tenth of that. So they certainly could. I mean, they could, whether it's the state attorney's office doing it themselves or the attorney general's office of the state of Florida, they may have authority over something like that to actually
Yeah.
file civil actions. I've just never seen it, but it doesn't mean
Mm.
they
Yeah,
couldn't.
I know, because this is an unusual
Yeah.
situation where the defendant has assets,
Hmm.
you know, and she caused them to have that first trial totally postponed because her attorney withdrew. So there's
Yeah.
there were a lot of costs involved in this. So
It's a unique
yeah,
situation, really. Yeah, your typical person going to prison for life.
yeah, has nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we can take some questions now. Thank you, guys. While on the topic of non-payment, how would, or if at all, the situation with Rashbaum affect payment to him by his clients, given that he had to be removed? Well, he actually withdrew himself. He wasn't told by the judge to withdraw. So yeah, I think it depends on the terms of their agreement. So who knows what the terms were. Can you, I mean, do you want to make a guess as to what kind of fee arrangement he could have had?
Yeah, I would only be speculating, but
Yeah.
if somebody has let's say they put $250,000 in trust, normally you bill against that and you give your client a billing statement. And if you have to withdraw, most attorneys are going to work with the client and probably refund what was in their trust that they didn't bill on. Now, flat fees, like if somebody paid, a flat fee of $100,000, let's say, to try a murder case, and they sort of got a third of the way through it and didn't actually have the trial, most lawyers are going to work with their client to refund a reasonable amount. And part of that is you don't want, that bad word of mouth out there to say, I hired this person and they had to withdraw and they just kept all the money.
Hmm.
But there was some back and forth on this that I think it was not totally clear that Rashbaum was going to refund enough to be satisfactory to the Adelsons. I did think that was brought up, whether or
Oh,
not he would do that.
where did you hear that?
I think it may have been in some of the jail calls, but
Oh,
it was a while back, and that I think it was mentioned, and I think it may have been mentioned on some of the podcasts as well, like how that would work. So I don't know if it was entirely clear, like how much he was giving back, how much he was keeping.
hmm.
It can be a little bit of a gray area, but as an attorney, you are, I think, governed by reasonableness by the Florida Bar or your state bar association. I mean, if you, like I say, you take $100,000 to represent somebody in a murder as a flat fee, and you withdraw 2 months into it before the trial, and you're going to say that I'm going to keep the 100,000, you're probably at least going to get a bar complaint and really be raked through the coals.
Hmm.
And then that word is going to get around. But some lesser cases, I mean, I've had flat fee agreements with clients, like, $3,000 for a divorce. And I put in the agreement, funds are earned upon receipt. There's no refunds. And, you can put that in your contract. And there are times I've still refunded people because, I mean, I had a case where a person passed away before we resolved the case. And I think they had paid me, they paid me a small amount as a small case, but I refunded some of it because I didn't have to do all the work that, and I just felt like that was the right thing to do, even though technically I could have kept it all.
Hmm.
but some of that's a bit of a gray area. So I don't really know how much Rashbaum refunded. Maybe he refunded.
Yeah. And once again, they can complain to the state bar if they feel like it's not fair or they have some sort of fee dispute. Because where I practice, we are told that even if you claim that this is a non-refundable flat fee, that's not up to the attorney to decide, because they can still complain to the state bar and say this is still an unreasonable fee compared to the work that was done or something. So that's a caveat that they tell us here in my state. So yeah, but it totally stinks to have to, squabble over fees with a former client. So hopefully they resolved it without, well, I don't see any lawsuit so far. So
they must have worked through it, but it's a common problem because somebody may just not work well with an attorney and have to hire a new one. And then, you've given a $15,000 retainer to an attorney on a family law case, or maybe on a crime or a criminal case. And well, I need that money now to hire somebody new. So, that's a dispute that comes up a lot. And I think most attorneys work through it because you're running a business like anything else. I mean, if you own a small store and somebody's unhappy as a customer, if you can refund them and make them a little bit happy and not have them badmouth you on the internet, then it's what you do. And but there are times where you could do a ton of work on a case, and then they want to fire you, and then they want all the money back, or they want
exactly. I mean, that is so frustrating when people totally discount all the work you've done for them because they didn't get what they wanted. So I run into that situation. So, well, Mia also mentions, wouldn't it be wonderful if Donna's commissary was garnished 100% until she fully repaid what she owes? But I think Katie Pokenschutz said they can garnish 50%. Does that sound right?
I don't have any knowledge of that, but that's interesting that they could do that. But it makes sense, and if you've got hundreds or even thousands of dollars at play at commissary, but you don't pay this judgment, I think it certainly would seem to make sense that they could recover some of it.
Yeah. So can you imagine every dollar that Harvey puts into Donna's commissary, maybe half of it could get seized. But she's going through an appeal, so they can't start doing that because she's appealing. So, okay. Well, thank you guys for the super chats. Let's see, okay, thanks for the great guest with a few minor exceptions. Thank you, Jeremy. This is quite informative. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so where are you working now? For the state?
I work for the state doing indigent criminal defense. I work with the Regional Conflict Council, which, in Florida, we have public defenders' offices in every county, but then we also have a separate Regional Conflict Council that represents people if there's a conflict. The example I give is like if two people are in a bank robbery, the same public defender can't represent both of those clients because they may say, well, that guy did it, I didn't really do it, or he did more than me. So they have to have conflict-free counsel. So that's where we come in. And in our state, we decided just to set up a separate arm, a separate office, in order to avoid having to appoint private attorneys and pay private attorneys to take a case. And it was trying to bring some order to it, bring some cost savings to it. And then if you have three bank robbers, public defender gets one, I get one, we still have to go to that list on the third person. They'd get a private attorney. The state would pay them a certain fee. But Florida's a little different in that sense because some states you have a public defender, or if they can't represent you, then it goes to the list of attorneys that agree to take those cases.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jim, for your super chats. Great discussion. Okay, thank you. And well, I don't know if you want to answer some of these goofy questions that I'm sure Vince is behind. But what do you think about Loophole Lawyer? Have you watched his stuff?
Well, I've watched him in the context of when he's on with you, and I think he's very funny. I think he's very
Well,
sure.
some people were very offended and disgusted by him, and I probably lost some subscribers and members. But I mean, it's all in good fun. You can't be serious 100% of the time. So,
I thought it was very funny the rapport, the chemistry you and he have. I think is very entertaining. You
okay.
know, him going back and forth on the racial stuff, or the part where I think you were explaining that your son has a piano lesson, and he was saying, "Oh well, I thought that was after the Chinese star lesson," and things like that.
Wow, you have been paying attention. But he does go, my son does go to Chinese school and he does Kumon math workbooks in his spare time. And I play the violin. So, okay, so we are in some respects, stereotypical, right? And we love doing math problems. It's fun. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I think I wish more kids would take up musical instruments, especially. Um, but it's interesting, and it's funny. He pokes fun at people across the board. It seems like so. I don't feel offended at
Okay.
all.
Well, thank you. Okay. Well, this is a dumb question. Do you think I would look better in a red or pink bikini? You can just state in general, do you prefer red or pink? Because this is a tacky question. Okay.
Uh, I don't. My personal preference, I guess, would be red, but
That's what I said. I said if I have to wear a bikini, if Wendi doesn't get arrested by December 31st, then uh-oh, but red, yeah, that's the Chinese color, right? Chinese people love red. Yeah. Okay. Okay. This is also a very tacky question to pose to a professional who has to run in these same circles. So F, marry or kill, like date, marry or kill, Georgia, Sarah, or Wendy, Jill.
they marry or kill. Wow.
Do you want to answer this, or is this kind of insulting to you?
I'll just say I guess you could say I kissed a few frogs before I met my wife, and
Oh,
I had one girlfriend that a buddy of mine said you don't need to date her because she probably killed somebody before. So
oh,
kind of put a damper on that one. But the Wendy Jill thing, that would be crazy to think about. That I saw some content here today about they're talking about were some of her past boyfriends interviewed and things like that, and their experiences and stuff. That would be surreal. I think if you were looking back thinking, well, did I see any signs that this family might have done something? And Jeffrey Lacasse was kind of, I can relate to him because I kind of had some experiences like him. Just sort of being. He seemed like he's a really nice guy, really smart, but he,
mhm.
maybe didn't have the best luck.
Spidey sense. Like he couldn't tell that he was being used and played.
So I can relate to that. That one line where he says, this is the kind of girl you throw yourself under a bus for. You
Oh,
know, I used to, be like that a little bit. So I can kind of relate to him and be like, man, I hope this guy, has a, nicer person in his life now.
okay. So you don't want to answer the question?
Yeah,
Well, I would assume you would get rid of Wendy Jill, and then who would you rather date, Georgia or Sarah?
yeah,
I think they're both beautiful, very talented, incredible prosecutors.
they are, and they're both wonderful ladies. So I couldn't really answer that one. They're both awesome people, and I got to know them. Sarah as a newer prosecutor when she, I think worked across the hall from me, so I got to know them in a little different context than the trials the public view, and they're both awesome people.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you also worked with Sarah Catherine Dugan.
Yeah, I want to say she started around 2011, so I was there in the felony trial division, and she was starting in the misdemeanors and went up to felony pretty fast. But yeah, I've known her for a little while.
Oh, okay. Hey, speaking of Wendi, do you recognize my dress? This is actually an asymmetrical neckline navy blue dress. I had to get it because I'm that crazy about the case. So this is like the dress she wore to Charlie's trial. I don't
Well,
think anyone realized that.
I mean, now that you mentioned it, I had to ask my wife when I first started hearing about asymmetrical neckline. I was like, "What does that really mean?" And she explained it to me, and then, but I think we all kind of are doing this. I mean, we've watched these trials so much. The other day, I was like, "Well, we need to get a bottle of Bullet bourbon,"
Bullet dry whiskey. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just, in a sense, maybe it's a little morbid, but in a sense, it's just kind of like we've lived all this so long. It's kind of like, well, you do notice the necklines, and I've said that to my wife sometimes. I'm like, oh, you need to get an asymmetrical neckline.
Or one of those great wool dresses with a black bric-a-brac on it or something. Yeah. So, okay, well, this is funny, but I don't think you get this joke. This show needs a 60-year-old alcoholic as comic relief. So that refers to John Melendez, the guy that has a channel called Stuttering John. He was the announcer for Jay Leno's talk show.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I did this law school quiz with him that somehow, I wouldn't say it's gone viral, but there's a lot of other podcasts now that have been piggybacking off of the law school quiz that I gave him because
Yeah.
he acted so silly and ridiculous when I asked him all these questions. So, yeah, some of it you can see on my channel, but unfortunately the audio wasn't very good. So, yeah.
I only
Do you know
know
who he is? John Melendez?
I really didn't before that. See, I've only watched Jay Leno in the Jay Leno Garage thing. I never watched the Tonight Show, so I just know the car segments that he does.
Oh, okay. What about Howard Stern? Did you ever listen to that?
I never did, and at that
Yeah,
period of
me
time,
neither. It's like we don't know who he is. So,
I was
yeah,
too busy studying, I guess, at that
yeah,
time.
yeah. So, anyway, just like a little off topic thing here. This man has more hair on his head than Stuttering John has good jokes in his act. Okay, so that's like a joke against John Melendez because he's making a living sort of as a comedian, but he also does these live stream shows where I think he's trying to get super chats
Yeah.
to support himself. So yeah, there's like a whole group of people calling themselves the Dappleverse that are obsessed with him and making fun of him and doing these reaction shows to his shows. So yeah. But I'm sure, yeah, we don't have time for that, right? Because we're busy working professionals. Yeah.
I,
Okay.
I just know a little bit about it
Thank
just
you.
in passing because I've seen you and Loophole Lawyer talking about it. So, but
Yeah.
it's like, oh man, I've missed out on a lot of stuff, that
That's okay. I think your time is better spent with your baby and your family and your law practice. So yeah, thank you, Tony Baloney. Okay. So let's get back to, do you have to go? It's been like an hour. So
no, I've got some more time if you're
sure.
wanting
People
to take.
love hearing from you because you're actually a criminal defense attorney with prosecutorial experience in Florida. So why is it taking so long to give Donna her forever home?
Yeah, that's kind of the $64,000 question since 2014. I think most people that read the probable cause reports back in 2016 and 17 knew that, this was not just Mr. Rivera, Mr. Garcia, and Miss Magmanua that decided out of the blue to go up to Tallahassee and do this. I think, and some prosecutors can reasonably disagree on the evidence, and if they don't feel like they can prove the case, you only get one chance. If you try the case, you can't, try it again. If you lose, if you're the state, if you're the prosecutor, so you have to get it right, and so you can legitimately, think there's not enough evidence and want the case to be stronger, so you delay it, you keep working on it. But there could also be other reasons for that too, that we've talked about before in this case. If I'm the elected prosecutor, maybe I don't want to have to go up against big time attorneys that are going to come in if I charge somebody that's got a couple of $1 million that they could throw at their defense. Should that factor into it? No. But it could. And we've talked about other things that may have been at issue. If you're an elected district attorney or state attorney and you're at odds with a local police chief and you don't like the agency, maybe you don't want to give them the credit. That shouldn't apply. You should really just look at the evidence and say, hey, this man was gunned down in his driveway, and two low-level criminals from South Florida aren't just going to drive up here for no reason. There's plenty of people they can rob and go after in the South Florida. They're not going to drive 7 hours for. So obviously there's somebody else pulling the strings on this and actually pulling the trigger. Let's go after them. And so that's why it's taken this long. And, I think it's
well, I think she's asking about Donna, though, because Donna still is at that women's reception center in Ocala. So I think Charlie was probably moved within a month or so after he was sentenced. So it's been a month and a half for Donna.
Could be some medical reasons, could be security that they're having to account for. In Florida, we only have 2 or 3 women's facilities. Mm-hmm. So they may have to account for her jail daughters, where they're going to go, and maybe not have Donna and those 2 ladies in the same facility. That could be a reason. So they keep her there longer. Maybe there's some medical issue they're having to deal with in the near term. Make sure that's addressed before she goes to, but she'll get there. And they may end up having to trade her to another state like they did Charlie, but she'll get there.
Yeah. Well, actually, Trina Bernhardt is out of prison now, or out of jail, because she was actually interviewed on STS, so maybe about a month or 2 ago. Yeah, not sure about Patricia Bird, but people kept making it sound like it was probably more likely she'll be put in Homestead, because that's a women's prison that's not too far from where Harvey is.
It could be. Lowell is the other one.
But Katie is there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think Santa Rosa is the only other one, if I'm not mistaken. So that's way over further to the west of where I am. So.
Well, Santa Rosa is where Sigfredo Garcia is, I think. So, but I mean, they obviously keep the men and women totally separate, right? So she could theoretically be put there. Maybe.
Yeah, they keep them separate, so it could be a possibility.
Yeah. Unless there are safety concerns. So.
Yeah. And there may be, their classification officer, they have to look at all those things and try to figure out where to house the person.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, is it true that Lowell has no air conditioning?
I don't know that in particular to Lowell, but I know there are a number of DOC prisons that don't. So it's not pleasant. And Lowell's had some problems with just how women are treated. I think there's been some credible reports that have come out over the last 5 or 6 years of Lowell and Santa Rosa that women inmates don't have an easy time in there. There's been sexual abuse. There's been, other things happening. So it's not a place you want to be.
Yeah, I saw that STS episode, which was maybe a couple of weeks ago. They had a couple of former prisoners from Florida who were women. And it just sounded like it was very stressful and scary to be there. And the staff would play games with them, like not giving them toilet paper or sanitary products and things. So just even those slights, even if you're not being assaulted,
Yeah.
that's still pretty awful. Yeah.
The humiliation, basically.
Yeah.
And that's not all officers, but, like every other profession, you probably have some that are really professional, really good. And you may have some that they get carried away with the power that they have over people.
Yeah. Okay. So what about this question? Adelson's paid so much for Josh Dubin as a jury selector. Why wouldn't they use that money for Donna's defense? Well, that's up to them to decide what they want to prioritize and throw their money at. I mean, how did you feel overall about Donna's attorney's performance?
They had a tough time. I mean, with what they had to
Yeah.
work with. You're confined in a very narrow lane with this defense because you don't want to disavow Charlie and his defense. So you're still going to go with the extortion defense. So they didn't have a lot to work with, and they didn't really have a lot of time when it's all said and done to get ready for the case. I mean, they had months, but you're going against prosecutors that have been working on this for 10 years. In Georgia's case, I mean, she was involved in this in 2014, 2015. So Josh Zellman's a very skilled attorney. He's got a lot of experience trying big cases. And of course, Jackie Fulford had as well as a prosecutor and as a judge. So, I think they did some things that worked well. They did other things I think didn't work well and didn't come across well. But when it's all, written in the history books, they didn't have a lot to work with. I mean, they're just, you try the case that you're given, you're stuck with the facts as they occur. And, you can get creative in some areas, but you're basically, in a path that you're sort of, it's not determined by you, it's determined by fate.
Okay. Can Jeremy expound a bit more on what the buzz around Tallahassee is? Well, you're not in Tallahassee anymore, are you?
That's right. I'm not in that courthouse anymore, not since about a year or so ago when I changed jobs. So I'm not really hearing inside buzz anymore on that. And some of this stuff, I mean, I don't know that I would really be privy to, even if I was, in that courthouse, because this only Jack Campbell and Georgia Kappelman probably at this point know, what's going to happen and when with Wendi.
Okay. I was looking for a few last questions. Probably have to get going here. Okay. Okay. Susan from True Lifestyle said Donna has been in phone contact nearly every day. Can she retain him? Oh, Rashbaum? I don't think so. I don't recall her having any more phone contact with Rashbaum after he withdrew. So maybe this person is, yeah, people have said even the appellate attorney can't represent Donna because they have to have separate counsel.
That's my understanding as well. I think she might be referring to an older segment that you did with
Oh
Susan?
yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Maybe I created some confusion because I re-uploaded and premiered an old live stream show from January 2024 with True Lifestyle. So I'm sorry for the confusion. Yeah, I thought I said in the description as well as the chat and the comments that this is an old live stream. So that's why whatever we were saying might not have made sense. So, yeah.
Yeah, that one, I was listening to that one in the car today because I was like, well, I kind of want to get maybe up to speed on some things. It's a very good episode, so I hope people will check it out. But when I first heard her talking about it, I'm like, well, wait, I don't think she's talking to Rashbaum now. That
Yeah.
must have been some time ago.
Yeah, that was like maybe December, late 2023 when Susan had the phone records. Yeah, but she hasn't been talking to Rashbaum for who knows how long, the last year or two, year and a half. Yeah, since he withdrew September 2024. Yeah. Okay, so Rebecca's in Tallahassee, I think. She says Georgia says stay tuned and still working in the last 2 weeks. Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah,
Oh, did you watch that Detective Isom interview with Mentor Lawyer? This was a few months ago.
I did, because I thought I was really interested to hear what he would have to say and how much insight he could give into it. And I really enjoyed that. I worked with him on different cases. I really like Isom. I feel like he was a great cop and the kind of person you want on this type of case.
Yeah. Well, and plus he said that Sanford is still working on the case, which made me feel very optimistic.
Yeah, yeah. I think if there's more to be had, and I would expect that we haven't heard everything that they would have on Wendi, and so that's I think a positive sign that he's still involved. And if I guess she's moved to another state and going by a different name, you know, there may still be more evidence that could be gathered and relevant to the trial, even in that scenario with her moving somewhere else and um, what her contacts with people are and her behavior is now. It's all, it's all potentially fair game.
Yeah. Just as you said, sometimes as time goes on, people turn against potential criminal defendants. And that definitely helped prosecute Charlie because as time went on, he was pissing off his ex-girlfriend, June. He, had a big falling out with his former best friend, Ryan. So it all just kind of like kept building the longer they delayed arresting him.
Yeah. Yeah. It certainly worked out. I don't know that most prosecutors would choose to go one at a time from the onset. There's reasons why you wouldn't want to do that, but they've made it work. And I think they've gotten lucky with how, new evidence has come out as they've gone sequentially like this.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to show again these little notes that I took about the new evidence regarding Wendi that came out during Donna's trial. So I think I forgot to include that apparently she had started taking down the kids' drawings off the walls
Yes.
within a week or even less than a week before Dan was shot.
I think that's a piece. I think the fact that she asked Mr. Lacasse, at what age do children have memories of things that happened to them? They had a discovery issue with that. They really couldn't talk about it in Donna's trial, but I would expect the state will be able to bring that testimony out if they do try Wendi.
Yeah, I sure hope so. And I still disagree with Lacasse was talking about, well, maybe 5 years old or something. I'm like, that's ridiculous because I still remember stuff that happened when I was 2 and 3 years old. I don't know. What about you? Do you have very early childhood memories?
Maybe 3 years old, 4 years old. And some of those being, you know, I guess you could say traumatic events. And but the mere fact that she asked that question,
Hmm.
I think most parents, they wouldn't even think of asking that question because you don't, most loving parents don't want to put their child into something that they may have a traumatic memory from. The fact that she's asking that question, I think, is very incriminating.
Hmm.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
basically trying to determine because the kids then I think were what 3 or 4.
Yes, 3 and 4.
Obviously at an age where that's they're probably going to remember stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah, I
Yeah.
thought that was I thought that was very incriminating when I heard it.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so anyway, I just want to flash that on the screen to refresh people's recollections of what I thought were new things that came out that don't don't look too good for Wendy. In addition to all the myriad of other little breadcrumbs.
The house, I think the house that you listed there, I think that's a significant piece. Because you're planning a life, so you're planning a life that Dan Markel is no longer going to be an impediment to where you go. So I think that's very significant.
Hmm.
If she had signed a contract for it and then he was murdered and then, she's locked into a contract, I think that's evidence that she didn't know something was going to happen and had no involvement of it. But the fact that she does that, that's not incriminating in terms of that alone convicting her, but incriminating her as like a mosaic of, you know, 500 pieces of evidence. Each one's like a little piece of the mosaic, like a tile. And then
Hmm.
all those tiles together would show the jury beyond a reasonable doubt what
Hmm.
her culpability is.
Yeah. Speaking of which, remember she went to lunch at Mosaic after driving
Yeah.
over to Dan's house and then getting the bullet rye whiskey and stuff. So, did you ever go to Mosaic?
I don't think so. I don't think I ever went there. That was more of an expensive um,
Hmm.
place. Um, if I did, maybe just one time. It wasn't a place I would go into a lot. But yeah, she's definitely trying to cover all of her bases that day. If you're trying to get ahead of law enforcement, you're putting yourself here and here. You're putting a receipt in your hand there. You're introducing your brother. Could possibly be a suspect because you want to introduce that and then
Divert attention.
divert.
Yeah.
Law enforcement will think, well, geez, she brought him up. She, of course, they're not involved. She brought him up, and
Yeah.
just to get that out of the way, and then, but maybe she was too smart for her own good with the drive to near the scene. The whole thing with the television, I think, became incriminating to her because Donna couldn't avoid talking on the phone.
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
Mentioning
Charlotte,
the TV, that's about 5. So, it was pretty clear that was a code word for the murder.
that might have worked if Donna hadn't said that in that call. Because then you start thinking about, well, Wendy's talking about TV, Donna's talking about TV. You
Yeah.
know, who repairs these televisions anymore?
Hmm. Yeah.
Nobody.
Made no sense to have some Geek Squad person come out when your screen is broken. So, and Jeff said she had to just keep it like that for weeks. And the kids were upset. He was offering to buy her a new TV, but no, she had to keep that busted TV sitting there. So it seemed suspicious. He even said like he felt like there were like drum beats or something. Something's happening. Something's important or weird about that date the 18th.
She
Yeah.
she all but made him sign an affidavit that he had seen the broken television,
Yeah.
And then think about the kids, you've had small kids. A child can throw something at the TV,
Hmm.
and unless they're swinging a golf club, are they really going to put a hole in the television?
Yeah.
You
Or
know,
crack it to the point where it's so damaged it's pixelated. Yeah.
so that part of it doesn't make sense. I mean, that might be interesting from the state's perspective of getting an expert witness on that, on the level of force it would take to put the TV out of commission. You know, maybe a little bit irrelevant, but it could give the jury something to think about.
Yeah. Maybe Jeff can give more testimony as to where the TV was located, how high off the floor it was. I mean, because he did say it looked like someone had deliberately just like bashed it. Yeah. Certainly not something a 3-year-old throwing a remote could have done, but that was Charlie who said that. That he thought it was Lincoln that threw the remote at it. Yeah. So, yeah, just to address this, I don't think Tamara Demko said anything about the house looking packed up. That was Ruth Markel who mentioned it in her book. Yeah. And also, I was just watching the Brian Walsh coverage with Joe Patuto. She was doing it with STS. And Joel said that he had recently had lunch or dinner with Ruth Markel, and she doesn't have any news because they're not obviously telling her whether Wendy's going to be arrested.
Yeah.
So it's all secret, right? But remember when Donna got arrested, she was saying something like, aren't they supposed to tell me about that first? So I'm just wondering, are there any situations where the state attorney will notify would-be defendants through their attorneys and say, hey, does your person want to turn him or herself in? Does that ever happen?
It does. There are times where, somebody would agree to a surrender. Maybe not on a murder case that I could think of an example of, but certainly other cases, and I've had situations like that too, where, your client's going to get charged with this, and, let me know when let me know when you're going to do the warrant and I'll have them turn themselves in. And that's something that's done quite often. And a lot of times law enforcement, if they've worked with you before, they'll give you that courtesy, or if they know the person's not a flight risk, but they have to go into the system, and they'll do that. But in Donna's case, obviously they need to keep that close to the vest if she's getting on a plane. And the same thing with Wendi, if she's moved to another state, there's a whole host of reasons why you don't want to tip anybody off. And it could put people in jeopardy. It could put law enforcement in jeopardy if they're going to go arrest somebody and now they've got a tip off. That could create a danger. Person could know they're going to jail. If they're unstable, suicidal, they may hurt themselves. They may hurt that officer. You might want the element of surprise. You may want to kind of just, as the person is going into Costco, you arrest them, out of the blue. That way nobody is at risk, So, but there are certainly times when, you get a call from law enforcement, say, hey, I'm going to have to arrest your guy. Can you have him at the jail? That type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you said it usually doesn't happen for murder cases, though, right?
I've never seen that, just because it's so much is at risk. You may have somebody that you never think would do anything, never run, but they find out they've got a murder case. Now they're 90 miles an hour out of the county. So people probably not going to take the chance on something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Last question, and then we can go take care of all her other stuff. But do you think Ruth could be called as a witness at Wendy's trial? I would say yes. I was kind of thinking she probably could have had some good info to say at Donna's trial too.
Oh, certainly possibility of the behavior at the funeral and the behavior right after the homicide, then also just refusing to allow the children any meaningful contact with the Markells and changing the name and things like that.
Hmm.
Certainly, um, certainly could have been used. And if you had a situation where you couldn't use Wendi to get evidence of the divorce in,
Hmm.
Ruth Markel may be a potential witness to some of that in terms of it being um, a contentious divorce,
Hmm.
possibly, to take the place of what Wendi has been relied upon to get in.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but could Ruth talk, potentially testify about what Dan had told her was going on between him and Wendy and the litigation?
Possibly, I mean, the real impediment there is the hearsay rules that
Yeah.
really, but there could be some limited circumstances why they could, occasionally victims can, a deceased victim could tell somebody, he's going to kill me, that type of thing
Hmm.
can be admissible. There might be a hearsay exception that could apply. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, what specifically would answer admitting that, but there could be something.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm sure there would probably be a deposition of her and motion and limine before
Oh
she would
yeah,
even get on the stand. Yeah.
they would fight to, they would fight to exclude that. The defense would fight to exclude that, and the
Hmm.
prosecutor would have to find an exception to the hearsay rules to allow that to be admitted.
Yeah.
It'd have to be something really significant. It would almost have to be something close to state of mind, or if
Yes,
anything
that's
ever
what I
happened,
was going to say. Yeah,
you know.
state of mind exception. Because today I was watching a little bit of that whole Brian Walsh murder case where he murdered and dismembered his wife in Massachusetts. And the man that the victim was having an affair with, he was able to get up there and testify a bit about what the victim had told him regarding her marriage and what she might have said to her husband.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
and there are cases where more of a domestic violence situation that turns into a homicide, where some of those statements are more easily admitted because you know a victim disclosed to her sister that she was being abused and then she's murdered. So some of those statements can be a state of mind or other exception to be admitted.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. Well, I think we should probably pack up and get going because it's been well over an hour here. So, what do you think in general? You still feel pretty confident that Wendy's going to get arrested? I mean, I would like to still be confident, but it is still frustrating because now it's December.
Oh, it is, and I can't imagine what the Markells must feel like, in the sense that it's 11 years every day. There's not been a day, I'm sure, that this hasn't weighed heavily on them. So it's, justice delayed seems to be justice denied. And I do think they'll get there. I mean, I still kind of think it could happen by the end of this year. I trust the prosecutors and law enforcement involved that they're going to do it when they feel like they need to and everything is lined up. They'll have a strong case. I think they'll have a case with a lot of evidence, and they'll have every tool at their disposal to successfully prosecute it. And I certainly hope that will be the case over the next several months.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I know you're real busy and you have so many other real cases in your working world to deal with. So that's why I think it's really cool that you've been so into this case too. Because most criminal defense attorneys, they're like, that's what I do for my job. I don't want to think about other true crime cases.
Well, I enjoy being on the program, and I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here with you. But yeah, for me, true crime is something that I just so interested in it. To me, it's so interesting, and I don't get tired of hearing about it. reading about it, talking about it.
Yeah. And you even write about it too. So I almost forgot to help you sell your books. So if you guys go to Amazon, you can Google or search for Jeremy Mutz. And how many books have you written now? It's a lot.
Well, I have 20 titles on Amazon. 3 are novels.
Wow.
The Chance I'll Take is my first novel. Don't Call It Murder is my second.
Hmm.
But I've done quite a few short stories and even done a couple of children's stories on there, all available on Amazon. And
Hmm.
for me, it's an outlet. It's something I love. I love fiction, and it's an outlet for me to deal with what I've done as a career.
Hmm. Oh, that's great. So it looks like some of these stories are very new, just this year.
I
So
think I've
that's
done
great.
10, maybe 10 this year,
Uh-huh.
but those have all been shorter. I've got one novella that I'm almost finished with. That'll probably be the last one for this year, but it's not quite ready yet. Maybe in another week or two.
Hmm. Wow, that's very incredible that you have time to do this, especially with a baby too. So,
You know, I don't have time, but sometimes when he gets up and I feed him, he goes back to sleep. It's still really early. I have time to do my day job work or write or do other things or read. I do love to read a lot of
mhm,
novels also. So sometimes the baby helps with that because he gets me up early and doing stuff.
mhm. Okay, that's great. Okay, well, thank you guys for all being here, still caring about justice for Dan, because there's not much news. So I'm kind of scrambling. It's like, okay, what can we possibly talk about or go over and, maybe start touching on different cases. So really appreciate people still caring. So, and your time, of course. So, okay. Well, it's great talking to you then. Have a good night.
You as well. I enjoyed it.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Justice
Take
for
care.
Dan.